Welcome, everyone. I'm Sean Young. I'm a medical school professor here at UCLA. I'm the director of the Institute for Prediction Technology across the University of California. And today we're going to be talking about this event, which is co-hosted with California Highway Patrol to study and talk about the new laws around cannabis starting in 2018, along with the implications for health, technology that can be used for this, as well as implications for driver safety. I was, as some of you know, I was recently in New York. I just got back yesterday, and in some of our meetings there, some of our meetings were with the New York City Police Department, NYPD, and there was an officer there that I was talking to, and he mentioned that he had just pulled over someone, and the person was driving slowly, and the person was weaving a little bit, and when he walked up to the person, he said there was a cloud of smoke in there, and he said, "How high are you?" And the man looked at him kind of confused and said, "No, officer, it's hi, how are you?" Now, it's just a funny story, but substances, including marijuana, change our judgment and decision making, and therefore it's important to be able to understand the implications of how to make a safer experience, especially on the road, and how to improve safety with the coming laws and make sure that we have a safe and healthy environment. And we believe that there's a big role for technologies to be able to help with that. So that is the purpose of this event, and I want to give a big thank you first to our sponsor, Jiffy. As an organization, we want to thank Jiffy for sponsoring this, and also want to give a big thank you to California Highway Patrol for being here, and to my staff, Kate Powell and Claire Houlihan. Claire, we couldn't have put this together without you. You've been so helpful. Thank you so much. All right, so without further ado, we'll get started. We are honored to have for our first speaker, Assistant Chief Kevin Davis from the California Highway Patrol. He has a long list of accolades I'll read through. So he started with the California Highway Patrol in 1997, having worked in central Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Francisco, and the CHP headquarters in Sacramento. He was previously certified as a drug recognition expert while working field patrol with over 1,000 impaired driving arrests. Other administrative assignments of his include having served as the CHP Accreditation Manager and Commander of CHP's Research and Planning Section. He was a graduate of the prestigious Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training Command College, where he studied autonomous vehicle technology. So he's not only an expert in understanding public safety, but also in technologies. He's currently Assistant Chief of California Highway Patrol, where he oversees the newly created Impaired Driving Section at CHP headquarters in Sacramento. Okay, everyone, please give a warm welcome for Assistant Chief Kevin Davis.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sean, for having us today. It's an honor to be here with you guys to talk a little bit about cannabis and the impacts on traffic safety, and to share with you just some of the things that the California Highway Patrol is doing and will be doing, and just some of the thoughts and reactions that we've had, to the legalization of cannabis last year. So we're obviously here to talk today about cannabis and the legalization in California. And the big news, of course, recognizing that medical cannabis has been legal since, I believe, 1996 in California. So the use of cannabis by residents of California is not necessarily new, but the recreational use of cannabis being legalized in California is new. And that started last November with the passage of Proposition 64, which essentially immediately legalized the use of recreational cannabis for adults in California, and is going to authorize the legal sales of cannabis beginning in January 1st of next year. So what does that mean? Obviously, as there's a lot of implications from transportation to taxation to industry, but what I'm going to talk about today is the focus on traffic safety. So what did that mean for the CHP and what did that mean for law enforcement? Well, it's going to have a profound impact, quite obviously, on my profession. Everything from the sales of cannabis to the regulation of cannabis to the transportation. There's going to be a litany of impacts to the law enforcement profession. But I think as a member of the California Highway Patrol, our number one concern is public safety and traffic collisions and how that's going to play out on our roads, right? And how is it going to play out? I wish I could tell you today that we know precisely what is and is not going to happen, but we don't know. You know, there's a lot of studies out there, there's a lot of research, some showing that there might be this profound increase in traffic collisions, others showing there may be a negligible increase. But the point remains, it's something we're very concerned with. And that's not just cannabis-impaired driving, it's drug-impaired driving in general. In 2015, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration reported that drugs were present in 43% of fatally injured drivers with a known blood result. It's a very high percentage, and for one of the first times, it actually exceeded the percentage of drivers with alcohol in their system, fatally injured drivers. So that's something that we're obviously very concerned with, something we're taking note of, especially with the impending legalization of cannabis. And when the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and others do roadside surveys, cannabis is by far the most prevalent drug that's used and reported of drivers who use drugs when driving. So it's something we're focused on, it's something we're aware of, and something we're really trying to take a close look at as we move forward into next year and now. And what's that going to mean for crash risk? Again, varying studies, varying results. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety recently reported that with the legalization of recreational cannabis in Colorado, Oregon, and Washington did result in an increase in crash claim frequency. So we don't know how much, but we do believe that traffic collisions are going to increase as a result of more people using cannabis and driving vehicles on our roadways. And I have a slide that talks about, it kind of shows a trajectory of the increase in traffic collisions in Colorado, and it pinpoints when it was legalized commercially and recreationally. And again, you see the slight increase as you move across that spectrum. And that, again, Colorado is obviously a very different state than California, very different geography and terrain, but nonetheless, it's something that we're keeping an eye on and something that we are concerned with here in California as well. But what we don't know much about, so although we know there's probably going to be an effect on crash risk, what we don't know so much about is how marijuana affects individuals. Unlike alcohol, where we have a very good idea of what someone's blood alcohol concentration is, at what presumptive levels that person becomes impaired, there's a lot of scientific research behind that for alcohol. There's not as much and very little, quite frankly, for cannabis. The relationship between a drug's presence in the body, its concentration, and its impairing effects on driving are complex and clearly not as well understood as that of alcohol. As such, relative to alcohol impairment, it's much more challenging to recognize cannabis or even drug impairment for our officers who stop people roadside. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it's also much more challenging for our prosecutors to prosecute those cases. Whereas with alcohol in California, we have a 0.08% presumptive level. It's very clear cut, it's relatively objective, it's very easy to explain to a jury and prosecute. We don't have such a thing for cannabis. So if the way cannabis affects one individual could vary greatly with how it affects another individual, and there is no presumptive level for cannabis impairment in California currently. A quote that I had I thought was interesting, and again, this is attributed to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 2015, it said, "At the current time, specific drug concentration levels cannot be reliably equated with a specific degree of driver impairment." And that's what I was alluding to previously, is that we don't have the science at this time behind presumptive levels of cannabis impairment like we do for alcohol impairment. However, as I alluded to previously, we do know that there is going to be some impact to crash risk. A recent review by the National Academy of Sciences concluded there is substantial evidence of a statistical association between cannabis use and increased risk of motor vehicle collisions. And that was from 2017, after conducting a comprehensive review of a lot of the data and a lot of the studies that are out there. So what do we do as law enforcement? How do we respond to this with all these challenges with prosecution and detecting people roadside and prosecuting potentially impaired drivers? There's a lot to be done, and I think I'll start with, especially given the audience here today, research. We recognize that there's a lot of research that needs to be done in this area. There's a lot of training to be done as a result of the research. A lot of education to be done, public education, making sure the public understands the dangers associated with cannabis use and driving. I've talked to a few people who some believe they're actually safer drivers when they're using cannabis. They believe they're driving slower and more cautious. And quite frankly, I don't think anything can be further from the truth. I think it definitely can impact and affect your ability to drive safely when using any drug, including cannabis. And how is law enforcement going to enforce this? Again, we've been enforcing drug-impaired driving for a long time, but the pressure now to really focus on cannabis-impaired drivers is increasing. There's a lot of technology that's starting to come out, a lot of new ways of looking at impaired drivers. A lot of the ways that we do things now with our roadside field sobriety tests, a lot of those have been around for a long time. A lot of those were developed to measure any type of impairment, but quite frankly, a lot of the focus was on alcohol impairment. So those are some of the things that we're really thinking about now as we enter into this new age, if you will, of cannabis legalization and an increased proliferation of drug-impaired driving on our roadways in California. Another area, of course, that goes along with the research is the evaluation of technology that's out there to assist us in our detection and evaluation of potentially impaired drivers. And finally, data collection is, again, another challenge for us as law enforcement. Talking to some law enforcement officials in Colorado, their advice was you really want to start gathering as much data as you can on this subject as you move forward. And the challenge is in California, for the longest time, the way we code our traffic collisions, for example, is based on what we call a primary collision factor. And that's the vehicle code section which our investigating officers believe caused a collision. For the longest time, up until just very recently, the laws in California for impaired driving, there was one law for impaired driving, whether it was alcohol, whether it was drugs, whether it was a combination of alcohol and drugs. So if you go back even as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, the only data that exists on motor vehicle collisions in California through our databases, which is the statewide integrated traffic record system, is how many collisions were caused by an impaired driver. We weren't able to break that down into drug impaired versus alcohol impaired, and certainly we're not able to break that down into which category of drugs were causing collisions. It's something that through the California legislature has addressed. There now are separate sections for drug impaired driving and alcohol impaired driving, and that's been of great assistance, but we still don't have separate sections to break down collision classifications by drug category. So it's something that we're working on now at the CHP, and it's something that we hope to have a much better grasp on as we move forward. Fortunately for the CHP and for law enforcement, one of the things that came with Proposition 64 was the allocation of funding to both our department and to other departments throughout the state to really combat the issue of impaired driving as well as address the public safety implications associated with the legalization of cannabis. Starting July 1st of next year, the CHP will begin receiving $3 million annually to establish and adopt protocols to determine whether a driver is operating a vehicle while impaired and setting forth best practices to assist other law enforcement agencies. So obviously that's something we're very excited about. As I'm sure you can imagine, funding is always a big challenge in state government and in law enforcement. So the idea that they put some money behind this to really let us do some research and to do some evaluation moving forward is really exciting for us as an organization and something that we're gearing up for now. This funding may also allow the CHP to make grants to public and private research institutions for the purpose of developing technology to help us determine when a driver is impaired. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But before I talk about the technology, I want to briefly touch on other sources of funding. Beginning in the year 2022, Proposition 64 mandated that a floor of at least $40 million be allocated to the CHP annually, and that's to make grants to qualified nonprofit organizations and local governments for education, prevention, and enforcement of DUI laws. So a lot of these things we're talking about, it's encouraging, despite the potential impacts to public safety, it's encouraging that some thought was put into the proposition to allow some funding mechanisms so that we can have a way of addressing and kind of taking some of these issues on and doing some research and doing, quite frankly, some meaningful work as we move forward into the coming years. And of course, that funding can also be made available for some of the other issues I referenced earlier, such as education and enforcement and things of that nature. Additionally, by the year 2022, the CHP, as outlined in the proposition, will be receiving $10 million a year. This is a separate funding source to conduct training programs for law enforcement for detecting, testing, and enforcing laws, impaired driving laws, including impaired driving by cannabis. So again, as we move forward, as we start doing some research, as we start identifying some best practices, our intent is that we, as the state leader in impaired driving in California, it's our intent that we will provide training mechanisms and training opportunities for not just ourselves, but for law enforcement agencies throughout the state charged with keeping our roadways safe. So again, that's something, as far as Proposition 64 goes, that we were very encouraged about, is to see the funding mechanisms and to know that there will be some ways to help us as we try to address these issues moving forward. I also wanted to take a few moments to kind of share with you guys some of the things that we're doing now today at the CHP. As Sean alluded to in his opening, I currently have oversight over what our newly created section at our headquarters called our impaired driving section. And really, it's just a dedicated section to focus on impaired driving issues. Previously, we had personnel at our academy who focused on training. We had personnel in our research and planning section who focused on some technology, and we had personnel who focused on policy. We kind of wanted to bring everyone together under one roof, if you will, to really focus on this issue. So we have our drug recognition experts, which we serve as a statewide coordinator for in California. We have officers who focus on policy, and we have a few analysts as well that are going to help us kind of identify our roadmap and moving forward and how we're going to allocate and utilize the funding that we anticipate receiving in the future. So again, that was something that's really exciting for us, that we this was an opportunity for us to really take a closer look at this issue and to really kind of galvanize our efforts and focus our personnel and our resources into one consolidated command that can help address the issue for our department moving forward. As some of you may be familiar, we are also, there's a lot of projects underway in the state. One example, down at University of California, San Diego, there's the Center for Medicinal Cannabis Research. We've been assisting with some of their efforts using some of our drug recognition experts down there as well. They're doing some really exciting work down there. We've really worked vigorously lately to really increase our participation and our collaboration with various stakeholders. Sean and David being some of those, and a lot of people throughout the state, because we know we can't solve this issue on our own. We know we need the expertise of others. We know we need the assistance of others. And not just researchers, but prosecutors, crime laboratories, allied agencies, and the litany of traffic safety advocates that are out there, such as the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, even the California Department of Motor Vehicles, California Office of Traffic Safety, just to name a few. These are organizations that we've worked with consistently, but we're kind of re-energizing and refocusing our efforts and really trying to make this a collaborative approach as we address the issue of impaired driving in California moving forward. Another thing that we did internally in the CHP, obviously all of our officers go to a 6-month academy and they receive training on detecting impaired driving, but it's, as I'm sure you can imagine, to become a CHP officer, there's a lot of things you get trained on at your academy, and you get I believe it's about 30 hours of instruction related to impaired driving, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Identifying, apprehending, pulling over, and testifying in an impaired driving case, those are challenging issues for law enforcement. So one thing that we're proud of is a training program we have called the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement, or as we refer to it, ARIDE training. It's kind of a next level training for our officers. It's usually done after they left the academy. It's a 16-hour course that really focuses just on impaired driving and also focusing on identifying drug impaired drivers. I can tell you early in my career, I started in central Los Angeles, very close to here. I was very confident when I stopped a driver, when I smelled alcohol and saw signs of alcohol impairment. I was a lot less confident when I stopped a driver who had, just seemingly wasn't acting right, but there was no alcohol odor. I had no device to test their alcohol level or their drug level. And that was a challenging issue. So that's why we've identified the need for this training program. And we've actually, our goal as a department is to make sure every CHP officer in the state and every CHP sergeant in the state receives this training by the end of 2017. To date, we've trained over 6,000 of our personnel in this training, and we are on track to ensure that all of our officers and sergeants will be ARIDE trained by the end of this year. And again, that was specifically done with an eye on looking forward and kind of addressing what we can in the near term, these increases that we anticipate, and quite frankly, we're already seeing in drug-impaired driving in California. I referenced earlier technology. I haven't delved into this as much as I'd like to, but I've seen a few demos. I've talked to some vendors. I've talked to some researchers. The field of roadside drug testing technology is rapidly evolving, and it's really exciting. We've been using what we call preliminary alcohol screening devices for many, many years in the CHP. It's basically a handheld breath testing device. It takes about 2 minutes, and you get feedback on someone's blood alcohol level within a minute, basically. And so it's very straightforward. It's a very valuable tool for officers. But currently today, we don't have a tool, we the CHP don't have a tool that does the same thing for drug impairment. Some of the things that are being developed are oral fluid testing devices that are being piloted by some agencies right now in California. There are some breath drug testing roadside devices that are currently being developed for use in California and elsewhere. I haven't seen any, but I've even read about some transdermal testing that's being developed out there. So there's a lot of exciting avenues out there right now that really would be a good tool for our officers. So again, as we move forward, as funding allows, these are some tools that we're going to be taking a closer look at and really evaluating to see how those apply to us and our operations and how they'll help our officers roadside into identifying and apprehending impaired drivers. Because the last thing we want to happen is for an officer who's stopped someone who may be drug impaired and lacking that extra tool and or lacking that extra training, lets them go and they travel on and a tragedy happens. That's what we don't want to happen. So we want to put as much training in, we want to implement as much training as possible and put the best tools in the hands of our officers as we can and moving forward. I referenced earlier the CHP currently serves as the statewide coordinator for the Drug Recognition Expert Program. This is a much more advanced level of roadside, not just roadside, but controlled environment testing of drug-impaired drivers. This class involves 72 hours of classroom instruction, followed by 30 hours of field certifications where students must demonstrate their proficiency in identifying drug-impaired drivers and even identifying categories of drugs. We've been working diligently to expand the number of DRE courses that we offer throughout the state, but given the hours involved, given the resources involved, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's really hard to even do more than one a month. Like I said, it's over 2 weeks of classroom instruction, followed by field certification, but we've really been ramping that up. To illustrate that, in 2016, we administered 16 DRE classes in the state, training and certifying 448 new DREs. That's not just CHP, that's allied agencies as well. So that's something that I wish we could have everyone DRE trained, but quite frankly, resources don't allow for that. But we are going to do everything in our power to expand DRE training as well as we move forward. Another effort that we're very proud of and very interested in is something that just recently kicked off. With the passage of Senate Bill 94 in June of this year, that was introduced by Assemblyman Lackey and signed by the governor on June 27th. It outlined and required the CHP to develop an impaired driving task force for California. with really the focus is developing recommendations for best practices to address impaired driving in California, as well as examining the different technologies out there and making recommendations to the legislature about how California should proceed. So that's something we're very excited about taking a leadership role in. We actually held our first meeting just very recently on October 3rd of this month at our headquarters in Sacramento. We had a very good turnout. We have a very diverse task force. And so it's something I encourage you. We will be having information on our website in the future about that. We actually posted the meeting for the previous meeting on our website. We have a wide variety of stakeholders there. Some of the ones I mentioned earlier, such as OTS, NHTSA, we have prosecutors, we have toxicologists, we have individuals with interest in social justice reform. We have a wide variety of advocates and experts on that task force, and we're really excited about the work that that task force is going to be able to do moving forward, again, to help shape recommendations for traffic safety and drug impairment in California. I know I was brief today. I understand we're going to have a question and answer session later. I don't know if that comes during the panel discussion or if there's some questions now, but format-wise, that's kind of what I wanted to cover with you guys today. I think the message here is we know something's coming. We don't know exactly what's coming. We don't know exactly what degree of increases we will have in traffic collisions attributed to drug-impaired drivers. But we're working hard to gather data to be sure we're prepared to identify drivers who are impaired and ensure that we're ready to kind of tackle this issue. I think the best way to put it is I'd rather be prepared for something that doesn't happen than to not plan for an increase and not be prepared when it does come next year. So with that, I will leave it. I will stop there. Sean, do we take questions now, or do we go to our panel discussion or our next speaker? I apologize, I don't know the format.
We'll go to our next speaker on
Okay.
Yes, I'll go over the format of it right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
I want to thank Chief Davis for giving a great overview on policy implications and traffic safety issues. And the format of today, as a reminder, so we are live streaming right now. We have wave hello to everyone in the live stream who's watching from online. The format of the presentation is that we will have speakers come up here individually from a diverse group of areas. So we just heard from the California Highway Patrol. In a minute, we're going to hear from a company, a mobile cannabis delivery company. We also have a technology expert who will be talking about sensors, and we have a medical perspective as well. Each of the speakers will be coming up to give a talk on their perspective of the work that they're doing. And then at 1:30, we will have a panel discussion where we'll invite all the speakers to come back up here to this table, and we will have will be a moderated discussion where we can be able to ask questions to them. So in anticipation of that, any questions that you have during the talk, please write down the questions. And what we are doing is both we will solicit questions from everyone here to be able to ask them in a moderated format. We are also requesting on the live stream. We're collecting through it's on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, I believe, Periscope also, and we are collecting questions from a live audience who can be able to prepare us with questions that they have.
Almost there.
All right, so for our next speaker, we are welcoming Veronica Santarelli of GRASP. So Veronica, as the Senior Vice President of Business Development for GRASP, Veronica is responsible for overseeing the regional expansion and strategic deployment of the company's cross-device information and communication services. She also heads government relations as well as patient education, where she is involved and advocates and communicates with various health and medical experts. After graduating from St. Elson College, Veronica began her career in the health and wellness industry, where she specializes in a scientific approach to wellness. She brings her passion and expertise to the cannabis industry, serving on the advisory board for Women Grow, a national organization supporting female leadership in the cannabis space. Everyone, please give a warm welcome for Veronica Santarelli.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here. Honored to present to you today. So I wanted to start with just a brief company description. GRASP is a regulatory communications and logistics technology for the safe and transparent delivery of premium lab-tested cannabis in California and in Arizona. Our mission is to deliver elevated experiences by using data to improve the interactions between all parties in order to set the industry standard for service, product, and experience. A new standard is within GRASP. So I wanted to start with just a very brief overview of the industry. And therapeutic cannabis has been part of our world culture since before Christ. It's been well documented in ancient Chinese history, in many other cultures, and it was actually part of the U.S. pharmacopoeia until from 1851 until 1942, and was commonly prescribed by physicians for a number of ailments, including epilepsy, cancer, rheumatism, menstrual cramps. It wasn't until policies passed by President Johnson and President Nixon when he created the War on Drugs and created the Controlled Substances Act in 1970, which listed cannabis as a Schedule I substance next to heroin and LSD. In 1996, California became the first state to enact a formal medical program with the Compassionate Care Act, or Prop 215. And it remained the largest unregulated market until 2015, when the Medical Cannabis Regulation and Safety Act was enacted in 2015. And before that, when the program just got started, it was real mom and pop dispensaries, very unprofessional, very fragmented processes. Many other states followed California with medical programs, and it wasn't until Colorado in 2014 became the first state to enact an adult use program. Now, although Colorado became the first state to enact a recreational program, they also became the first state to outlaw recreational delivery. And so Washington, Alaska followed suit. They enacted recreational programs, but also prohibited the service of delivery. Oregon became the first state to allow for recreational delivery with the help of GRASP, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. In 2016, California passed Prop 64, of course, and became the second state to legalize recreational delivery. Currently, 29 medical marijuana states exist, with 8 recreational states and DC. So with all of these new laws and new programs, a lot of states were looking for ways to regulate safely that protected public health and safety, especially around the service of delivery. With that, GRASP saw an opportunity to set the standard, and with commercial legalization came a lot of questions. How will access and availability to adolescents be prevented? How will we protect our kids? What types of quality controls and informational controls will protect consumers? How will DUI and driving impairment be handled, enforced, and tested? How will commercial delivery be tracked to improve and ensure public health and safety? Well, the federal government also had questions and concerns, of course. And when we look at the importance of why regulated delivery, why it is important, you really need to look at it from both a recreational state as well as a medical state. So let's first look at a recreational state and look at the Cole Memorandum. So in 2013, the Justice Department published the Cole Memorandum, which was a list of stipulations laid out by our Attorney General at that time, James Cole. Jeff Sessions, our current Attorney General, also approves of these stipulations. And it basically gave states guidance. It gave federal, state, and law enforcement guidance as to the 8 most important areas for them to create a very accountable and transparent framework for regulating the cannabis movement. It also said that states needed to mandate an seed-to-sale tracking system to track the growth, distribution, and sale of cannabis. And so when we saw this Cole Memorandum and we saw what was happening in Colorado and Washington and Alaska, we really wanted to get ahead of the trend that was happening with outlawing and prohibiting delivery. And so as soon as Oregon passed its Measure 91, which was its recreational program, we went and we testified in front of the legislative committee to explain the importance of regulating the service. And we brought with us information from Colorado, from Washington, that stated police reports and news reports that showed that the black market was thriving in the illegal delivery space, and that recreational license holders were losing business to the black market and the drug cartel. And recreational license owners were frustrated because they could not compete in that area. And so Oregon had the opportunity to look at that data and to look at those reports and to get their program right. And so with the help of GRASP and us showing our transparent system and pointing out that with the 3 points that our technology already addressed in the Cole Memorandum. So 3 of the points that our technology already addressed was preventing drug driving by giving an alternative method of acquiring cannabis to recreational consumers. It prevents diversion to minors with our HIPAA-compliant servers and verification system. And then preventing cannabis revenue from funding criminal enterprises and drug cartels. When you prohibit a service, the drug cartel comes in and takes over. When you regulate, you have safety, transparency, and guidance. And so with that, Oregon became the first state to legalize recreational delivery, and GRASP was on the forefront of that as well. And looking at a medical program, why regulated delivery is important. Well, if you look at the qualifying conditions across the nation, patients with serious health conditions cannot leave their homes. Qualifying conditions across the border, cancer, Parkinson's disease, medical MS, Alzheimer's, dementia, PTSD, Parkinson's disease, debilitating diseases that prevent mobility. The organizations like the World Health Organization in 2014 called for the legalization and regulation of cannabis. And then organizations like the American Public Health Association talked about that legalizing the commercial sale of cannabis is an important public health policy. So regulatory bodies started seeing the data from Colorado and Washington. They saw that this is an important service for patients, that it's important in a recreational market to adhere to the Cole Memorandum. And so with that, they need tools. And so we have a powerful solution within GRASP. We created transparency and compliance tools for regulators, professional and legal sources for patients to have safe access, and then tracking and feedback mechanisms that create insights for continuous improvements. When we looked at the legal landscape across the nation for the legalization movement, we identified medical or recreational cannabis programs and connected with the regulating bodies at the state and municipal levels. We spoke to a lot of Department of Health organizations, city attorneys, city council members, legislative bodies, city planners, and we showed them our technology. We talked to them about the partners that we were planning on operating with, and it really helped us to include and consider their feedback, to understand their concerns, and to ensure that we were compliant with their current regulations. We talked about already what we did with Oregon, and we looked at, of course, we went to states that we wanted to operate in. But we also looked at states where we could really help push the needle forward, states where cannabis was still criminalized, and we saw that we had a legal and moral obligation to help educate government bodies. And so we went to New Hampshire, San Francisco, San Diego, LA, Maine, Oregon, Washington, Florida, Nevada, Arizona, all over the nation. And we met with regulators and we talked to them and we helped educate them on the safety of this service. We've also had the good fortune to work with a number of medical and health organizations. We've worked with the San Diego Arthritis Medical Clinic with pain management. We've worked with the Silverado Memory Care skilled nursing community. That's a national organization assisting dementia and Alzheimer's patients. The San Diego Brain Tumor Foundation, we are starting to get a lot of referrals from oncologists. Home Instead Senior Care, we work a lot with our senior population. The autism community, a lot of autistic kids have epilepsy, and so some of the CBD oils are tremendously beneficial. The ripple effect, preventing veteran suicide, combat veterans that are coming back with severe PTSD. Of course, the UC Institute for Prediction Technology with Dr. Sean Young, which we'll get into a little bit more later, and then Hospice and Palliative Care of Phoenix. So we've learned a lot working with these medical and health organizations. We've learned what delivery methods are critically important to patients. We've learned what delivery methods are the most effective, what products, what ratios of THC to CBD. And so when we looked at where we were going to launch, we looked at areas that were both licensing dispensaries and had regulated delivery and approved delivery. And so we wanted to look at the differences between two states that we've been operating in. So, sorry, let me go back. So in California, we moved down to San Diego. We launched with the first licensed collective in San Diego, Outliers Collective. Worked very closely with the county sheriff and county board of supervisors on a very regulated and highly detailed framework. The unique aspect of that ordinance, and from what we had learned with the patients that we had served in the patients that we were serving, is that the edibles were one of the items that were not included in that ordinance. And so we could sell all other delivery methods in San Diego except edibles. And when you've worked with pain patients and you've worked with seniors, you understand that edibles are a really important delivery method for that population. And so we continue to work towards collecting data and understanding the consumer and the patient needs in San Diego. And then we turned to Arizona, which also had an incredibly regulated framework that we could work under. We launched there with ZonaCare, a top-tier licensed operator, fully compliant with Arizona regulations. They operate 4 dispensaries across the state and are also vertically integrated. So they have cultivation, retail, and transportation licenses. I would say Arizona is the most regulated medical program in the nation. The Cole Memorandum mandates that recreational states implement a seed-to-sale tracking system. It's not mandated for medical states, most medical states. New York and Florida now have that, but Arizona was the first, and they really wanted to get it right. So in 2010, when their program started, they implemented a seed-to-sale system immediately. Patients there, the cost of their card is $350. In California, you can get one for $30. It's a 2-week waiting process for patients to get their card from the state. It's mailed to them. After it's processed, they receive a unique identified patient number, and every product that they purchase is redeemed in the Arizona Health Department's website. So it's highly regulated. Delivery drivers all go through an FBI fingerprint background check. It takes 2 weeks for them to receive their dispensary agent cards. Again, they have a unique identifier. So for every product that's purchased in Arizona, the dispensary agent needs to enter that into the system. It's converted into grams, and then we can see whether the patient has enough on their biweekly allotment, which is 2.5 ounces. Delivery times are longer because each delivery, the regulation mandates that a trip ticket be completed with all appropriate patient information, DA, producer license numbers, all listed products, and then a navigation and trip ticket attached to that, detailing the navigation path of the delivery. So despite the fact that it cuts down on delivery time or increases delivery times, which does decrease profitability to some extent, we are able, with that regulation, to serve our patients with every delivery method needed. So edibles, concentrates, tincture oils, flour, and concentrates. And that's really important because GRASP, as we have continued to study and learn what patients need, we've understood that edibles are an important component and that some patients absolutely need access to them. Now, with that, with working with government bodies, with working with health organizations, GRASP is very committed to continuing to work with researchers, working with Dr. Sean Young at the UC Institute for Prediction Technology. We compiled in-depth research on the premium consumer and the medical consumer, where to find them, how to market to them. We segmented those audiences down and ran targeted interviews, structured surveys, and social experiments. And Dr. Gill will be detailing some of that data a little bit later. We ran controlled tests across the entire delivery experience to understand the variables that drove professionalism, trust, safety, and ultimately the desired outcomes with the consumer. We analyzed the audience's responses to product quality, pricing variations, operating minimums, customer support needs, and other patterns from data uncovered in multiple markets. And we continue to learn. So when analyzing cannabis delivery, we should look at where we've come from and where we are today. From going from a very unprofessional system to world-class service with GRASP, from lack of training and standard operating procedures to corporate training techniques and detailed checklists and standard operating procedures, from fragmented processes and manual dispatching to streamlined efficiencies through technology. From states like Colorado prohibiting delivery to states like Oregon and California regulating it, and Washington calling for GRASP to help overturn their delivery laws. And so the future for medical and recreational cannabis is bright as regulations get put in place and we start to understand the data that we are collecting. There's really incredible scientific discoveries being made in parts of the world like Israel and Canada and Spain, where national legalization is moving a lot faster than it is in the US. There's exciting discoveries to be made with CBN for sleeping and CBG for skincare and THCV for diabetics and weight loss. So really excited to see what comes from all this medical discoveries that are coming our way. Sports and national organizations for sports like the NHL, NHL, high-impact sports like boxing will start to overturn their policies on cannabis, medicinal cannabis at least. And starting in 2018, CBD will no longer be prohibited by the World Anti-Doping Agency. So we're moving in the right direction. Science will continue to replace stigma. Stigma still exists, but we do believe that someday the endocannabinoid system will be taught in traditional medical schools and integrative health will become more of a focus. And overall, the bar will be raised. Future of delivery regulations, continuous improvement and progression, of course, better technologies, data and insights, better technologies for increased access and driver safety, better testing for driver impairments. SDSU is on the cusp of some really exciting technologies. And then California setting the standard for mobile cannabis delivery. A lot of nations are looking at California and are excited by what's happening here with mobile delivery through technology, and we're excited to work and grow internationally. And then more states will start to regulate delivery, cannabis programs overall, and cities and municipalities will start to overturn the bans that they've implemented. And I thank you so much for being an attentive audience. Please feel free to reach out with questions.
So it looks like we are right on schedule. So we have, right now we have just about 10 minutes or so for bathroom break. Grab some, we've got bagels, we've got coffee, strawberry infused water. So we'll take about a 10-minute break and then start with our next speaker.